We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
Not only will this tax plan pay for itself, but it will pay down debt.
There are moral and legal obligation questions that I think we'll have to wrestle with as a society.
When we as people go wobbly on the truth, we go wobbly on America.
All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done.
And this is all in the beginning.
From 100.9 FM WXIR, this is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor. Evidence of Design is a live talk show about the political economy. We critique income and wealth inequality and support democratic values. Thank you for listening, and welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Happy the 4th of January, 2020. This is the first show of Evidence of Design of the new year, and we hope that you had a good new year and happy holidays, whatever it is that you celebrate. And we are pleased to be here for you live on this 4th of January, talking today about copyright. What a better way to start the new year than to talk about copyrights and laws and legislation. So for those new to the show, we mainly critique income and wealth inequality. We explore where economic inequality comes from and try to figure out, why it matters, because it matters a whole heck of a lot. And that'll tie directly into today's show, where we'll be talking about what copyrights are, what protections copyright, what protections does copyright bring. And also, what about some of the controversy with copyright? A lot of folks may not know Disney's powerful role in lobbying legislatures to extend copyright protections and what effect that has on the public domain and our ability as sort of individual citizens who are not large corporations to use previous works to create new things out of it. And so we'll be talking about all of that today, and we would love to hear from you throughout the show. I should first take attendance, though, and say, Jason Taylor is present. Matt Treadwell?
Here.
Mary Lawrence?
I'm also present to the world.
Nice. And we have this is a new person on our attendance roster today, I'm seeing, Justin Plini.
Hi, I'm here.
Excellent. So full attendance. Justin, thanks a lot for being on the show. You are sort of a special honorary guest today, and really appreciate you coming on to help us talk about copyright.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to be here.
So we'll get into, more introductions and Justin, what you'll bring to the table for this conversation in just a second. I want to remind folks, though, that this is live radio, so you're most welcome to give us a call at 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. We'll remind you throughout the hour to call in. Don't be shy about calling in. Again, we're talking about copyright, and you're welcome to share any questions or point of view that you have. It is valued. That's the point of Grassroots Radio. You can also email us at radioeod@gmail.com. Again, radioeod@gmail.com. And by the same handle, find us on Facebook and Twitter, Radio EOD. Justin, can I turn it back to you? And would you mind kind of, introducing yourself and sharing kind of what you do here in Rochester and why you're involved and know about copyright protections?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a user experience designer here at a company in Rochester. That's a new thing that just happened, which is really cool.
A user experience designer.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So, day to day, specifically for software, I work out the kinks and make sure that like a user can use something efficiently and effectively. It's kind of like, I put it as like I go to work and I solve puzzles all day and try to figure out, what's the best plan of action for somebody to take. Yeah.
So it's kind of like you're in software then, computing. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like ergonomics for software, making computer things work conveniently for users.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Great. And so, what else do you do in Rochester, and how does that connect to your interest in copyright?
So I'm also a graphic designer by trade. I mean, technically I'm a graphic designer. Found UX and was like, yeah, I'll stay in that. I'm also a musician. I also do a radio show. My whole interest in copyright became because I have this weird interest in nostalgia culture, in specifically the American society, and that kind of trickled into me, learning more about copyright laws and how they've changed and become so different over the years.
What do you mean by nostalgic culture?
So the best way that I could put it is if you you loved something when you were a kid, so much so that you're interested in seeing it again now today, which Disney is notorious for having that be in their wheelhouse of, here's all the things that you loved when you were younger, and let me just throw it in your face, and you will love it again now.
And so your sort of love of those things in the past, that you discovered what copyright is through that?
Yeah. So, it came about, when I was just kind of researching Disney's long history of copyright, and specifically how Disney has used the public domain to their advantage, taking from stories from the public domain and then, making it their own, and capitalizing on that.
As a graphic designer, are you conscientious about breaking copyright law, or are you also conscientious about the work that you produce and that being protected by copyright?
As a designer, you're definitely always wary of what's going on, and you don't want to steal from anybody, especially if it's a big, corporation, because they will come down on you hard and they'll say, yeah, that's ours. Don't do that. So I think that's a lot of, where it ties into is I have to be aware of, the sort of things that people own and make sure I don't, steal from that at all.
I presume that also wouldn't just be a slap on the wrist, but also some financial burden on you if you were to break copyright law?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. If I were to break any sort of copyright law or regulation, I would probably either get a cease and desist, or I would, be taken to court almost immediately.
And would you, going to school, I remember everyone would be like, don't plagiarize, you can't just copy someone else's text. In graphic design, is that similar?
It is similar. So it's a weird line that you have to walk on, right? Where it's you don't want to specifically copy somebody else's art, but inherently I think as humans we're always kind of seeing something and mimicking it in some way or the other. I could have seen a painting 20 years ago and then I make a new work all of a sudden and I'm like, oh, that looks a lot similar to what I saw. Well, it's different now. I've changed it a little bit, so I guess it's okay, so it's that weird line I have to walk.
Oh, so you're saying we as people always draw inspiration from things, and that's normal, and that helps us using our experiences to create new things from our experiences and inspiration. But the issue with that potentially is that we are ripping someone off. And where's the line between ripping someone off and also drawing from your experiences and inspiration and your endeavor to create something new?
Right, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Matt, that's similar for music as well? I know we've talked about before in private about how, people have been making music for a long time, and as the music industry or melodies or harmonies or so on and so forth sort of homogenize, some people could say, if they don't know music a lot, wow, hasn't every single, piece of music ever been written already? Do you ever run into that as a musician?
I'm probably not the best person to talk to about this, but my understanding of copyright and how it works with music is that there are certain aspects of music that you can copyright, such as a melody, but there are other aspects, things like a chord progression, for example, that are not copyrightable. And in the last decade, we saw a number of high-profile cases in which a popular song came out. There was that Sam Smith song a few years ago that Tom Petty took to court. There was Uptown Funk, I believe, was taken to court by the estate of Marvin Gaye, and numerous others. I don't tend to worry about it too much because as long as you're not making money off music, which Justin, I'm sure is very difficult to do.
Right.
People don't really care.
Oh, that's really interesting. So we'll get into this, the idea where, copyright helps to protect people's work so you can profit off of it, right? If you're a musician and you make your own music, that's your job, that's your work, that's what you're contributing to society, and therefore you should be monetarily compensated for your work, right? That's the idea. But also the issue is that you're one person, not a corporation. And so as you were speaking, Justin, it's very easier for Disney to take you to task and say, slap on the wrist, hold on, we can fine you for this because this is our property, as it is for you as a single musician in Rochester, New York, to sort of hold on to your intellectual property, as it were. So that's a very interesting distinction we'll get into throughout this hour. And we probably should start, though, by defining what copyright is. And, I think it's important to sort of lay that groundwork because Justin, I appreciate you wanting to be on the show because I didn't know anything about copyright until like 48 hours ago, and as a mid to late 20-something-year-old, I can't tell you how fun it is to spend your Friday night reading hours and hours about copyright law.
You had a great time.
I actually enjoyed it somehow. The first half an hour was pain, and then the several hours after that was like, there's so much to discover in the world, and I want to know it all. And even that includes arcane copyright legislation. So let's get into it. No, but it's really good. So I want to sort of quickly define what copyright is so everyone has that groundwork because I didn't really know, 48 hours ago. And then we'll go from there and talk about some of the really interesting points that have already brought up, especially the differences between corporate power and individual power. So in essence, copyright protection is protection given to original works of authorship that is in a fixed, tangible medium. So that means if you create a song, a book, a drama or play, even pantomimes or choreography, sculptural works or art, movies, pictures, sound recordings, or even architecture and computer programs, any of those things can be have copyright protection such that it means that no one else can take your work and reproduce it. Huh. If it's an original work of authorship that is in a fixed, tangible medium, that has copyright protection. And how something gets copyright protection is it's actually automatic. So the moment you create something as an original work of authorship in a fixed, tangible medium, you automatically have copyright protection of that work.
Would the fixed, tangible medium, so to speak, mean that it is published?
No. So the moment you create something, you automatically have copyright over that work.
Yeah. Huh.
And so you can go through the Library of Congress and the U.S. government's Copyright Office to get something officially copyrighted through their sort of database. Mm-hmm. And that's useful if you're, I imagine that Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Harry Potter, so on and so forth, those things have formally gone through to get copyright protection so that, it can be officially in the books and you can take people to court for them and it helps sort of your legal case. But, the moment you create a song, that that's yours and you have copyright protection over that. And in theory, you could bring charges against someone if they reproduced or used your work in a different exchange, in theory. But of course, that's very expensive to do as an individual, and that cues in our larger systemic disparities between corporate power and individual power. So again, copyright protection, it's any original work of authorship in a fixed, tangible medium of exchange. And if you have copyright protection, it prevents people from copying, sharing, displaying, performing, or adapting your work without your permission. So any use of your work in a copy in any way, that is prevented through copyright protection. It's important to note, though, that copyright differs from patents and trademarks. So copyright protection does not protect ideas, procedures, systems, concepts, discoveries, titles, names, slogans, things like that. That stuff is not copyright protected. Again, it must be an original work of authorship in a tangible, fixed medium. You can get patents or trademarks on those other things like ideas or processes, but that's not part of our discussion today. We're just focusing on copyright. And I sort of want to end, a few more quick points is that it's interesting that there's a principle called made for hire, where that if you are an employee of a company and you make something on the job while working in that company, your company has ownership of that work. You don't.
Yeah, I've had to, for the last couple jobs that I've started at, I've had to sign, in the non-disclosure agreements and stuff. There's clauses in there where it's very, very specific. If you have an idea or you create something while you're at this company through your work, then it is, it's ours. And when you leave, it stays with us. Yeah.
And that's really, a lot of people might not know that, where, hey, I made this. Well, not if you're, on the job working for your company. You don't have ownership over that work. And as musicians, I don't know much about what it means to get on a label or as writers, to work with a publisher, but you're also sort of signing away your rights in many regards that way as well. Kind of like made for hire.
I've heard a lot of horror stories.
Yes. And so, while copyright sounds good in principle, hey, if I make this, I automatically have copyright protection. If you want to turn that into something to be monetized, oftentimes you have to go through other societal vehicles to transfer your creation into a commodity such that it can be sold for profit. And therefore, you lose a lot of rights throughout that process. Lastly, for copyrights, this is something that we are very keen on for the radio, and also a lot of folks have probably heard about this in your everyday life using the internet, and that's something called fair use. So the idea behind fair use is that, everyone automatically has copyright over any original work of authorship in a fixed tangible medium. How will we ever be able to share, play music, exchange anything? Well, the idea of fair use is that you are able to use and share and distribute and modify copyrighted work as long as it's for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research. So any of those things that don't have a for-profit basis or motive, you can, through fair use copyrighted work. And that's, arguably a great thing because it allows us to share pieces of work and create new knowledge with them. So that's copyright in a nutshell, is that if you create anything in a fixed tangible medium that is an original work of authorship, you automatically have copyright protection. And fair use allows people to use things as long as it's, in general, for a non-profit basis. We probably, anyone can jump in here, talk about kind of the history of copyright and why copyright is even a thing. So, Justin, in your work and your exploration of what did you phrase it as culture?
Nostalgic culture.
Nostalgic culture. That's a cool phrase. Like in your exploration of that, did you ever sort of uncover or think about why we have copyright protections to begin with?
Oh yeah, absolutely. What I've uncovered and realized, it's because, people want ownership and they want to make claim that they made that idea and it's their idea and they want to keep it for as long as they can. To go into the history, I guess, of copyright a little bit, when copyright, I guess, first came about in the U.S. in 1790, I think, it was 14 years. That was your entity. It was yours. And after that 14 years, it became public domain. Or you could renew it for an additional 14 years. And then as time's gone on, people said, no, I want that longer. It's mine. It's mine because they want to monetize it and they want to capitalize on, what they made, essentially. Now it's a ridiculous amount of time. But yeah, so it all started at 14 years, and then you had 14 more, and now I think it's up to the idea creator's entire lifetime plus an additional 75 years, if I'm correct.
It might be 70, but yeah, totally. Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Just to be fair, in 1790, the lifespan of the average person was probably not too long,
right? Exactly.
Compared to now.
But no one's lifespan today is their life plus 70 years.
That's true.
No one's lifespan.
I'm feeling optimistic about my chances, actually. But
I was just gonna give a Star Wars spoiler, and I'm gonna stop myself.
Yeah. In the limited research I did, Justin, you might be able to confirm this for me. It sounded like for the first 100 or so years that copyright law actually existed in the U.S., it was rarely acted upon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it wasn't until these big corporations came around and said, "Oh no, we want to monetize and we want to have complete ownership over an entity," that it really became more in the forefront or the public's eye. Especially in the age of downloading music and stuff like that. Musicians specifically started to get really mad because they weren't making any money off of people, illegally downloading their stuff. There used to be, I'm pretty sure ad campaigns that used to play before movies about pirating movies and making sure that.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
I remember those, but yeah, no, I think it wasn't really until a corporation became what it is today that people started to care about ownership of an idea.
And it also seemed that there's a correlation between the expansion of copyright law in the U.S. and the creation of these, what I've heard referred to as mega characters, these monolithic characters like Mickey Mouse or Superman and Batman that have just become so indelible to our culture, and yet at the same time restricted from us.
No, yeah, it's kind of nuts that, Mickey Mouse specifically is, the whole reason behind why I think Disney has like specifically lobbied with Congress is because they don't want to lose Mickey Mouse as an entity. They don't want to have Mickey Mouse be accessible by the public, where somebody could make a Mickey Mouse T-shirt and then they could profit off of that T-shirt, not as Disney but as something else, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. But I mean, it makes sense, right? You know, Mickey Mouse was Walt Disney's vision. It was his idea. Like, that was his character. So why is it such a big deal that, you know, somebody else recreates Mickey Mouse and uses his likeness or uses, you know, a version of Mickey Mouse for themselves? It's because it's ownership. It's because I made that thing and I want to have complete control over that thing. So it's weird. It's crazy.
And listeners, we should remind you that you're tuned in to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester, New York. You're listening to Evidence of Design, and we're talking about copyright protections today on the show. What a mundane and arcane topic, but we make it fun. Well, we try to. But anyways, you know, you're welcome to participate. 585-219-8889, 585-219-8889. We're talking about copyright protections. We're establishing what they are, how it impacts us as individuals, and what too large of power corporations wield over copyright protections as compared to us as individuals. Justin, you just brought up the idea that Disney has been lobbying Congress to make copyright protections last longer and longer. You said that in 1790, right when the U.S. was officially formed as we know it today, copyright protections lasted for 14 years, and then you could apply to renew that copyright protection for another 14 years. Mm-hmm. Today, copyright protections last for the lifetime of the author of the work, plus an additional 70 years. So that is, that could be 130 years longer of copyright protection than it originally was. Disney had a role in that? Yes? No? And can you sort of explain more about how or why Disney has lobbied Congress to extend copyright protections?
Sure. So yeah, I think in 1975 they were getting nervous because Steamboat Willie, one of the original Disney Mickey Mouse cartoons, was about to be up for copyright. So it would become public domain, and anybody could take that entity and use it however they wanted to. So 1975 came around and they said, no, please, for the love of God, please do not take our sweet Mickey Mouse from us.
We are only the largest multimedia corporation in the world. Please do not deprive us of our livelihood.
Exactly. And then, so I don't know how that happened. They probably lobbied with Congress. They probably begged and pleaded, and they said, okay, sure, no problem. We'll extend it to the idea creator's life, and then 50 years, and you get 50 years, and that's that. And they're like, okay, cool, no problem. Then again, in 1998, the same sort of thing started to happen where, okay, that idea creator's life and 50 years started to run out, and they were like, okay, now what do we do? Please, for the love of God, don't do this again. And now it's the idea creator's life in 70 years. That is about to be up again in 2024. However, people are saying or speculating that it's probably not going to happen this time. I think Disney did meet with Congress, I think around 2016, 2017, to talk with them about extending copyright law again, which they were shot down immediately on the spot. Wow. So I don't know what's going to happen.
As I understand it, one of the reasons why Disney was able to get away with this in the previous two instances was because there wasn't much of an opposition to them extending the copyright. In some of the articles that you linked to us, Justin, for this conversation, it was stated that because of the boom of the internet and the creation of online communities, there's now a much larger sort of collective and resistance against the idea of copyright law getting any further extensions on it.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds about right. Especially now, when Disney, like a mega corporation who owns, so many corporations underneath it. I forgot what I was going to say halfway. Oh no, they own all these corporations underneath it. Now they can specifically say, please don't take this from us. But the reason why they're saying that is because they don't. I can't think today.
Still early.
Yeah, it's still too early for me. they just don't want people to have ownership of it because there is more of an access to public domain entities because of the internet. They want people want their content and they want it for as cheap as possible. And now that Disney owns and monopolizes all of these sub-corporations, they don't want to give that up.
This is a really interesting point because so the original intent of copyright, I think, was to give people protection over their work. Right, and we sort of established that's probably a good thing, where if you're a musician and you author a piece of music, or if that's the right word, compose, I don't know, if you create a piece of music, you would want that to be yours because you don't want someone else to say, hey, I made that, let me make money off of that, and you know, that's not good. So, you know, this whole idea of copyright came out of 1700s, 1600s, and cool. But what I'm hearing now is like the issue is that the copyright protections are lasting a much longer time now, and they're perhaps principally benefiting major corporations at the expense of the idea of public domain. So even with original copyright protections, the idea is never that you don't own your creations in perpetuity, right? You are a human being like everyone else on the planet, and by living, you are always creating, and that's normal, but you don't own your creations in perpetuity, right? Like Walt Disney should never own Mickey Mouse, even though he created him. Like, eventually that has to go into what's known as the public domain. And that's the copyright or intellectual property idea where someone else's creation can be used, distributed, adapted, exchanged, by anyone else, because that person no longer has ownership over that. And so I think sort of what I'm hearing here is that, you know, the difference now with technology is that we as consumers and, you know, other corporate practices, Spotify, internet, so on and so forth, you know, Netflix, are able to sort of access media very quickly. And questions arise about, are people getting compensated for their work in a fair way?
No, that's a good. I mean, I'm glad that you started talking about public domain because the whole idea and belief of public domain was that, you know, it was to benefit society as a whole. It was you could take an idea and you could take that idea and adapt it and change it and, you know, progression would happen. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So now the fact that, you know, a corporation specifically doesn't want anybody else to be able to, the way that Disney operates is they take from the public domain and they don't give back. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they don't give back kind of screws up the entire idea and belief system behind public domain. It's this utopian, you know, we're all in this together and we can all change and modify things how we want to. And now that's just not the case.
What do you mean Disney takes from the public and doesn't give back?
Sure. I should have brought this up earlier. So, you know, Disney's had a long time history, and this is where my nostalgia culture obsession kind of, you know, began, was Disney has a long time history of, you know, taking stories from the public domain, adapting them, and then licensing and then marketing them as their own, you know, idea and entity.
Alice in Wonderland.
Alice in Wonderland, you know, Snow White.
Every story. I mean, Notre Dame de Paris.
Yeah.
Anything. Everything. You know, Lion King is based off of Hamlet. There's just so many things out there that Disney is taken from specifically and not given back to the public domain, which is, you know, crazy, and it's mind-blowing when I first read this. And then, you know, it kind of lines up with Disney's new corporate agenda, which is to just buy and amass all these, you know,
IPs.
Yeah, IPs, you know, like
Marvel, Star Wars.
Exactly. And now they're doing that and licensing that, and they have ownership over this idea and grand idea of nostalgia. You know, they own Star Wars. Everybody loves Star Wars. Well, most people do. But but they own that, and they're going to use that and monetize that in the best way that they can.
Everyone but Mark Hamill.
Yeah.
Star Wars now. Rightfully so. Wow, that's really, so I didn't really grow up watching a lot of Disney shows or TV, you know, or whatnot. So that's really fascinating to me. I didn't realize that Disney has all of those IPs or copyrights or ideas that they sort of took from the public domain, made them their own, and sort of created a wall around it to be profited from. Mm-hmm. You said Lion King. What are some other examples that were mentioned?
I think pretty much any of their stories. Yeah, Hunchback of Notre Dame,
Cinderella, Snow White. Any classic like
even
Disney
like
animated feature you can think of, really.
Like the one with Ariel. Pretty much any Disney princess is a historical figure with a story written about them, whether it's fictional or nonfiction. And Disney has taken all of them. I don't think that they've actually created a story other than the Disney Pixar things, maybe, which might be original. But I think all of the like
Pixar was
classic,
a company before Disney bought them.
Yeah, for sure. But the classic Disney films that we know and see are stories that are often hundreds of years old.
Yeah. Aladdin.
And actually, we just saw, like, speaking of this nostalgia culture bringing things back, we're starting to see a lot of live action versions of, like, The Lion King. We just saw an advertisement for Mulan, which will be coming out. Exact same story. They just want to make money off it again. And they can.
Yeah, I mean, the ideas behind that, I think, are like their marketing department's trying to reach a new audience, right, which is the young parents. So we grew up watching Mulan and, you know, Lady and the Tramp or whatever, and now they're saying, you know, now that you're parents, you can still enjoy this story, and your kid's going to enjoy this story too because it's live action. So now it's not like just specifically for kids, but it's also for, you know, young adults, young parents, you know, people around our age, I'm assuming, which is, you know, nuts. And part of me is like, okay, are they doing that because they want to continue to have this entity in their wheelhouse? You know, if the copyright on Snow White ran up, is that why they started to redo Snow White in a live action sense or something like that? Or is it because, you know, they are just trying to market and make money?
Not that it is terribly relevant to the conversation, but I have not seen a live action Disney remake that lives up to its animated predecessor.
Right? Yeah, it's weird. I've seen a couple of them now, and I'm just like, why did you guys do this? But I get it. Some people love them. Some people are
I'm sure
like,
they make
great.
all their money. All the money.
Oh, absolutely.
Wait, this is fascinating to me. So I just I googled Snow White because I don't know anything about Disney. I'm sort of Disney ignorant about sort of a lot of the culture. So Snow White, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was based on the Brothers Grimm fairy tale.
Oh yeah.
So does that mean if I want to go back to the Brothers Grimm and remake my own version of Snow White, am I not allowed to do that because Disney has copyright?
You can, but you just can't use the likeness of those characters that they've created. So, you know, that could even be like the color palette that they use in the movie. That's why, I don't know if you guys have ever seen, like, if you're at Redbox or you see these weird movies that, like, are Disney movies, but they're like really low budget Disney movies, but they're not made by Disney. They're made by some other, you know, production company. And they'll be like The Dwarf's Day Out or something like that. And like, you know, they have some name to them that doesn't make sense to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but they're like still made. And like, because they can access public domain, they can access the Brothers Grimm's fairy tale and make a Snow White version, but it's just not called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
So you can recreate the thing you
have to be really careful about it.
This was brought up in some of the articles that we read where the Steamboat Willie version of Mickey Mouse is going to be up for entering the public domain in 2024. But further or later incarnations of Mickey Mouse, such as when he in the original Steamboat Willie cartoon, he does not wear gloves, for example. These later incarnations of Mickey Mouse will still be under copyright protection.
Yeah, exactly. And that same article, I think, was even referencing, like, if you wanted to use Mickey Mouse, but in the color palette of Mickey Mouse, you have to be very careful. You can't use that red. You can't use that same yellow that his shoes are or whatever. In the later iterations, you have to kind of make it different and make it weird. Not weird, but make it not recognizable, I guess.
I think this added complexity to how copyright law operates only serves to further discourage people from sort of making their own adaptations. Just because something enters the copyright law, or enters the public domain rather, doesn't mean that some version of it still isn't protected under copyright law.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, listeners, we should remind you that you're listening to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. We probably should take a short break here, and we'll be right back. We want to remind you that you're welcome to call in at 585-219-8889. Again, 585-219-8889. We're talking about copyright today. What is copyright? What protections does that bring forth? And what are maybe some of the controversial aspects to copyright? Should copyright protections be shorter? Do they outsizely benefit large corporations? We're talking about all that today. We'd love to hear your questions, comments, etc. 585-219-8889. We'll be right back on 100.9 FM WXIR.
The Imperial March by John Williams, performed by the London Voices and London Symphony Orchestra.
I've heard that before, Matt. Where have I heard that?
A little known movie series called Star Wars.
The Lord of the Rings.
One of those.
Nice. So, oh man, I would love to talk about Star Wars, but should we have other things I think to talk about.
I know I had to stop myself from that spoiler.
Well, I think I should bring up Star Wars later. Well, okay, I don't know. So maybe this is worth it. Feel free to interrupt me or jump in. But I think a problem that copyright can bring forth. So George Lucas originally made Star Wars in the 70s, right? And under the old copyright schemes, he would have held onto rights to Star Wars for 14 years, and then that would have extended another 14 years if he wanted to. That was following the original copyright law in the 1790s. That changed throughout U.S. history, where they extended that to 28 years. Then you could renew it to another 28 years, and then it was extended, around the 70s, around George Lucas created Star Wars, to the life of the author plus 50 years, and now today it's the life of the author plus 70 years. So the idea behind that is George Lucas creates Star Wars in the 1970s. That will go into public domain in like 2110. So no one on this planet right now will be alive. Most people will not be alive in 2110.
Nobody might be alive.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Depending on how things go.
Yeah. I mean, the rate we're going now, why have a copyright at all? We got to shorten those extensions. No. So the idea is that like George Lucas would own rights to Star Wars for a very long time, but of course I think he sold them to Disney or something. So
for like $4 billion.
For a lot of money. Yeah.
Obscene sum.
With a lot of zeros. And so now Disney has rights to Star Wars. And you could argue, well, what's the problem with that? Disney can leverage a lot of resources to make a new Star Wars, and as a citizen in society who loves entertainment, because I was born around the 21st century, I'm addicted to entertainment and I want good entertainment. Great, Disney can make good entertainment. Well, I think the problem with that is that companies will not do the best things with ideas or intellectual property, and I would argue that we see that with the most recent Star Wars movies, where they are essentially reskinned rehashes of like George Lucas's original films in the 70s. You could say it's good, if you like that, but you could watch the most recent 3 new Star Wars films, and they are the same principal plot points as the movies in the 70s. Arguably, if Disney didn't own those rights, you would have other people making better content with the Star Wars IP. The issue is Disney knows it can play it safe and make a lot of money, the billions of dollars it can off of Star Wars. And so that's the issue with copyright, is that you're not actually doing something to advance public knowledge or interest after a while, arguably, if companies are just going to keep having a monopoly over this information to keep making the most money possible.
I think going off that point, Jason, there is an obvious, before Disney purchased the Star Wars property, there was a number of books, video games, and other forms of media that were created within the Star Wars universe that were all basically they were given a fair bit of creative control in terms of what they were allowed to do, so long as they didn't talk about the time frame surrounding the movie series itself. So you would get stories set in like 4,000 years before the original movie series, and that was all interesting and fun. And as a result of Disney purchasing the Star Wars IP, we have seen more movies come out, but we've also, I think, seen less books, less comics, and less video games, especially because the rights to develop and publish Star Wars games are solely held by EA at this moment, who've had a very controversial tenure in possessing those rights, which we don't need to go into, but I know we've talked about it before.
Yeah. Mary, should we transition here to talk about international copyright law and sort of give a brief overview of that?
Sure. I mean, it's by no means comprehensive. Mostly just when we were starting to think about copyright in general and talking about it on this episode, I think that one thing that we need to be really aware of is that when we talk about copyright, we're only talking about copyright in the United States. There is actually no international standard for copyright. Most nations follow some sort of copyright policy, but there isn't any international law. So when you have copyright, like when we say that we create a work and it's automatically under copyright, it is only automatically under copyright in the United States. So if someone in another country sees your work and decides to try and make money off it, it's going to be a different process to go after them because they're not under the same copyright law. So I was a little curious about what kinds of things the world does to sort of combat that or protect internationally. And there was around the same time that actually Disney was starting to fight to prolong protection over the Mickey Mouse thing. And I think probably also because the internet was becoming more commonplace. So around in 1967, there was an organization created through the United Nations. It started with a different name, but it's now called the World Intellectual Property Organization, or
WIPO.
Yeah, WIPO. WIPO. I don't know how you'd want to pronounce it. But it says it was created in 1967, quote, to encourage creative activity to promote the protection of intellectual property throughout the world. WIPO currently has 192 member states, so there are most nations in the world are in agreement about what they talk about. And those things are treaties. So there are different treaties that nations will sign on to about more specific parts of copyright law that then they take into their nations. So there are certain things that are shared throughout the world, but not necessarily all the same thing. So there are currently 26 treaties. Not all of those nations sign on to all treaties. I don't know offhand how many the United States has signed on to, but I think it's quite a lot of them, if not all of them. The headquarters is in Geneva, Switzerland, which I just thought kind of amusing considering Switzerland's history for, secrecy and not wanting to share things. I was just like, oh, that's interesting.
I don't know anything about that, but that'd be something to go into some other time, perhaps.
Just thinking about banking, so many people who have money somewhere. It's like, put it in a Swiss bank, So it was, created sort of to have a common agreement. I looked a little bit into property rights in the European Union just to see if there was something that popped out. Generally, just the EU wants to have the ability to share property throughout the member states without sort of like sharing borders. They just want to be able to share property. So there are a lot of agreements. While each nation has its own laws, there are more laws that are shared throughout the European Union so that they can share property and knowledge more freely than with the rest of the world. So the EU sort of has a standard, but it's not a set standard that I can name. And I also looked a little bit just into, out of curiosity, China and Japan, which are also larger nations that would have a lot of power in dispersing knowledge or entertainment. And generally just in China, the copyright term is the life of the author plus 50 years. But if it's something that's made by a company or organization, it's just 50 years after the first publication. And in Japan, it's about the same. So the Convention of Copyright Law of Japan protects works for 50 years after the author's death, and again, 50 years after publication for corporations or in the case that the author is unknown. So it just kind of a little look into what law is around the world. It seems that it's fairly similar. I believe Europe also has a clause for the author's life plus 50 or 70 years. I don't know offhand which it is, but they seem to be rather on par. But again, if you have something that is protected by copyright in one nation, you would have to reapply in a different nation to get it be copyrighted there because it's not where it was created.
I propose that we find out which countries do not have Star Wars copyrighted in, and then we go make good Star Wars movies in that country, because that seems to be the only way we'll
I think
get it.
Because we're American and we have still, we have, I don't remember what the wording is, but there is sort of an access or a point of attachment, I believe it's called, where if I think the point of attachment would usually be where a work is created. That is the point of attachment. So that's where the law would first be applicable. But if we as Americans go somewhere else to create a movie, I think we still would be under that point of attachment because we're U.S. citizens, so we would still be able to be prosecuted.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not willing to renounce my citizenship for Star Wars movie. Sorry.
I could be persuaded.
Well, listeners, you're listening to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester, and this is Evidence of Design. We're talking about copyright today, and all of that all of which is entailed when talking about copyright. There's a lot of things, and such a seemingly boring topic really influences all of us because we are, on a day-by-day basis, interacting with things that are copyrighted or have copyright protections, and that we reproduce them and exchange them and modify them as part of our everyday lives. And so it's really interesting to think about where copyright protections are extended, who's protected by them, and who benefits from them. We've talked a lot about Disney, which has done extensive lobbying over the years to drastically expand copyright protections to where they are now, and that is the life of the author plus 70 years. We have a special guest here, Justin, who is let us know that Disney's been working on that. And we also have a caller that we should try to turn to now. Hi, you're on 100.9 FM WXIR.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we are.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, is this Aaron from Queens?
Aaron
from Queens.
It sure is. Yeah, buddy.
How's it going?
Pretty good. I just wanted to call in with a pretty simple question. You guys are creators. You have this radio show. I don't know how it works on radio, but I imagine you guys have the copyright to it. Or just in general, let's say you write a book, you write a screenplay or a director on a movie. I don't know how that works. If you could decide your own length of copyright, if you could pick your own copyright laws that apply to your work, what would you pick, like the length of time?
I do just want to make a quick note that we do not make money off this radio show. Just if that affects anything.
I don't think it does. Yeah, it's just any point of creation. But yeah, Aaron, that's a great question. So sort of the debate is, when we were having this conversation earlier in the hour, we were like, look, copyright is a good thing because it gives people the ability to make money off of stuff that they create, right? Good thing. Mm-hmm. Bad thing is it can lead to all the things that we've talked about.
Right.
Matt, do you want to take it?
Well, I think personally, my concern is that the current system seems to be in favor of, or it allows for things like Disney to exist in order to buy up all these properties and then monopolize them, essentially. And I think that is sort of opposed to what we should want. There needs to be a system in place that protects original creators, but also allows the culture to expand and adapt and transform itself. If we had to
don't be a politician. I'm asking if you could pick your own copyright.
If we had to put a number on it, I would say 15 years.
Don't be a politician.
From when it's created or after the death of Matt the author?
From when it's first published.
For thousands of years.
From when it's first published, I would say 15 years after first publication.
I would, that's where I was going to go, Matt. I would agree with you. I would actually go back to maybe 1790 in the U.S. and say, the 14-year thing sounds right to me. Because if you're going to make money off of something, you have 14 years to do it. That sounds fair. That might even be too long. I'm not sure. But I would go with 15 years to get a nice round number there.
Mary?
I'm not sure, actually. I guess it depends on the kind of work. I guess as a writer, like wanting to protect, I'm like actually tempted to go more conservative and say the lifetime, but have it end when you die. I don't know why copyright should extend after someone's death at all, because like you're obviously not going to make money off it after you die.
It's not really useful for you at that point.
No, I mean maybe this goes back into the conversations that we've had about estate, and wanting to pass wealth onto children. And since I don't think that's a good idea, and I don't agree with that concept. So I think that no matter how long it ends or it ends up being during your lifetime, I do think that copyright everything should enter the public domain when you die.
Justin?
Cool. So that's 14 or 15 years for Jason and Matt. So now I know how long to wait to steal your guys' ideas. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Aaron from Queens.
You have to wait until I die, though, so I'm still on Evidence of Design, sorry.
It's good to hear from you, Aaron. Thanks a lot for giving us a call. Justin, did you want to weigh on that as well?
Oh, yeah. Well, I agree with you guys in the 15 years. I think, personally for me, I would also say 15 years because also in that 15 years, I'm probably creating new stuff. So, while I'm making the new stuff, I have the old stuff to kind of make some money off of, but I'm making new stuff every year or every few months or however you do it, so 15 years seems fair.
Yeah. We didn't bring up yet that the right to copyright is actually enshrined in our Constitution. So actually the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 says, "The Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and investors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries." So, we're talking about copyright. That's enshrined in the U.S. Constitution as a right that we have in America. I didn't know that before delving out to this, and that's pretty fascinating to me. That's in Article 1 of the Constitution, next to where Congress has the power to raise armies and collect taxes. Also the power to allow authors and investors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. That's pretty fascinating. Maybe I'm rehashing an old point, but the worry to me is this idea of capital conversion, where you take something that isn't commodified or monetized and turn it into something for private monetization or commodification. And you sort of let me know about Disney's practices in that, and the hegemony or the power they have over culture over long periods of time to wield both that cultural prescription, but also the ability to raise lots of money through that work. And that's what I get worried about as well. And I think that's where you're going for too, Matt.
I mean, if I can just chime in here,
Please.
One of the things that brought me to this weird, crazy conclusion and interest in all this stuff was when Disney announced that they were going to have their own streaming platform, Disney Plus. But they specifically did it after they bought up all this real estate, all this, 21st Century Fox, and they, promised all 21 seasons or however many seasons of The Simpsons were going to be on at rollout. And they did it in such a way that they've undercut all the other streaming services, right? So I think Disney Plus is $8.99 a month, whereas, Netflix and Hulu are like around $10 region a month. So they did it specifically. So all of those things that, Netflix had ownership of, any Disney, any 21st Century Fox, anything else is now going back to the Disney Plus platform. So everybody's going to jump over there because everybody loves those Disney characters or Star Wars or Marvel or anything that they own, which is crazy.
And I think jumping off that point, Justin, one point to make is that a majority of the content, and I don't actually own Disney Plus, so I can't, but maybe you can speak to this, being a member. I'm a member. A majority of the content on it is not original. It's been released previously. The only original content on Disney Plus, I believe, is The Mandalorian, which is a new Star Wars TV show, and a couple of other movies and TV shows.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So they have The Mandalorian, which people are crazy about. I watched all of it in one sitting because I loved it. But there's, they're making new content as well now, where they're doing like documentary shows about the company itself, or they're like creating new specific canon specifically for Disney Plus, not to be a motion picture. The same way that Netflix is making movies for its platform, only Disney is kind of doing the same thing now, where you have to have, that Disney Plus membership to be able to watch all that stuff, which is crazy. I mean, it's good for them, but is it good for us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if this is true or not, but I just sort of feel like in our culture right now, there's so many re-releases of things. I play a lot of video games, and there's just so many games that are just I'm basically playing the same games today that I played when I was 12 years old, because all the games that I played when I was 12 are just re-released, and I have fun playing them, but it's still sort of the same games, the same IPs, the same rehashes. It sort of seems.
Well, it's true of that in movies too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up. Like, Mary, what you're bringing up, it sounds like that's similar with movies. I don't know if this is a real phenomenon or if there's more works out there being created too, but to me, it just feels like there's so much recreation of things.
I can speak to a most recent example. There was Black Christmas, which came out this December, and I believe it's either the third or the fourth time that movie has been released.
Just as a remake, as like a rehashing of it.
There was like a 2006 version. There was like a there's a 70s or 80s version, which is the original, and there might have been one in between those two as well.
Is it the same story?
The same general concept, I believe. I don't know too much about it, but there have been, it is a remake of a remake of a remake, potentially, of an original movie.
Okay. I was just wondering, because obviously, like we were saying, copyright doesn't protect titles, so I wasn't sure if it was
no, it's the same
title
idea.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's like only so many places you can go, but with that title, but I don't know.
I mean, to bring it back to Star Wars, I know we've talked a lot about it, but it's people are willing to go see the new Star Wars movie, whether they like these new characters, whether they like their way they're going, because they're selling Star Wars, they're selling the franchise, they're selling. Well, it's a Star Wars movie, so I have to go see it, right?
Yeah.
I had to get Disney Plus so I could watch the new Star Wars show and see Baby Yoda, but It's fascinating that, Americans have such an interest in the things of the past. I mean, look at like Stranger Things. Like that was a phenomenon because they were taking, movies or and like paying homage to them in the show. And people were like, oh, we love this show. It's the 80s. I want to go back to the 80s. And New Coke came out, and New Coke became a feature in the latest season of Stranger Things, yeah. And then Coca-Cola released New Coke in stores that you could buy. You'd be like, well, you saw it in Stranger Things. Why don't you try it again? Maybe you'll like it this time, which is fascinating. It's weird, and it's this weird sort of corporate playing into people's obsession with the past and what people really like and loved. I grew up playing video games too. I will buy every remake of any game that I've ever played because I remember playing it and loving it. It's crazy.
Yeah. Huh.
Well, on that note,
no, this is just a really interesting topic to me. I didn't think that copyright would be so rich in terms to consider. And we didn't get to everything, of course, in this 1 hour to think about copyright. There's a lot more. Matt, you looked into this, and sorry we don't have time, but there's a lot more things we could connect to and explore in terms of how modern technology really affects copyright, our use of it. I know we hinted at it, but there is legislation. What was it, Matt? The
Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998.
Right. And so that is very influential in terms of what can or can't be shared online. And also there was something very recently in 2018, the Orrin Hatch and Bob Goodlatte Music Modernization Act or something. So, copyright protections are continually sort of being revitalized. And we didn't get into, I really wanted to, Justin, but you said that right now it seems like copyright protections may not be extended for things like Mickey Mouse. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of political will right now to extend copyright. And Matt, you brought up a good point that that had changed, something changed, because now there's sort of a public backlash against the idea that copyright protections should be so stringent. So we didn't have time to investigate those things. There's a lot more here to this discussion. I'm just sort of pleased to have it. Any last words? We probably should end here.
Yeah, I think we got to wrap up.
All right. So, thanks as always for tuning in to Evidence of Design. We're here for you live every Saturday, and we love to have this conversation with you. Grassroots Radio through 100.9 FM, WXIR. Speaking of copyright protections and big media and big business, this ain't it. So really appreciate having this space, and thank you to WXIR. Up next is the Esquire Hour. They put on a pretty killer show, and we'll be in the studio for you in just under 2 minutes. With that, I'll retake attendance. Jason Taylor's out of here. Matt Treadwell.
Farewell.
Mary Lawrence.
Have a good one.
Special guest Justin Plini. Thanks so much for being on. Where can people